Thank you all for coming. It's a great pleasure to speak to the audience here. I'm going to surprise the AHRF, and I'm not going to speak on the Rhodes mines. And, that subject has been hashed over for so many years, and there's been so much introduced into the forums and the things that have been written that are so false and blatantly wrong that it's hard to really put a handle on anything unless you really get down in and do studying on each particular mine location, where the information come from. When I first started prospecting back in about 1960, it was very evident to me that there were Spanish in the area because I had talked to many old Indians who were, I was 19 years old, and here they're 75 and 80 years old and telling me stories about their father and their grandfather encountering Spaniards and people with iron shirts. When I first started prospecting in the UNAs and all over the western United States, and God bless my wife for putting up with me and that I'm still alive because of it. But there were approximately 3 maps that were available to look at that were authentic Spanish maps at that time. As the time grew on, people done more research, and then people started writing books for money. When that started, all of a sudden maps started appearing, not one or two, but by the dozens. And it's funny, if you look at those maps, they all fit on a piece of copy paper, 8.5 by 11. Pretty astounding, isn't it? I've seen some original Spanish maps that were made by the Spaniards in the 1850s. One of them was about the size of a man's hand that was owned by a woman in Goshen, Utah. Her name was Mary Guyman Sulcer Steele Moore. So you know how many times she was married. She was a good friend of Ed Hartzell, and Ed Hartzell, of course, knew Sidney Rhodes. And after Caleb Rhodes died, then Sidney Rhodes came into possession of this map. I seen that original map. Well, I'm not going to say that Mary Guyman stole that map. I doubt Sidney would have given that map to her. But anyway, it was in the possession of Mary, and I was privileged to see that map. She wouldn't let me copy it, but I remembered in detail what it looked like, and it was of the Kidney Lake area. So, Kidney Lake? No, Kidney Lake. It's west of Moon Lake in the Kidney Lake Basin, and it showed Brown Duck Basin. Showed approximately 5 or 6 mines up in there, and where they was located. Anyway, as you can see, the AHRF is involved in many different projects, mainly ancient discoveries. Archaeologists today tell you anything that's over 50 years old is ancient. You find something and you want to dig in it, you better be real careful about how you handle it, because they'll make it an archaeological site on you if you don't handle it and get your own archaeologists in there to protect that site. Nothing against archaeologists. It's just that you have to follow a rule of thumb as to the best way to handle those things and how to bring them to pass. The topic that I chose to speak on today is Spanish, but it has nothing to do with the Rhodes mines per se, except for the fact that in the 1850s, it's well documented that Spaniards were in here through the Indians and from the pioneers that came in here and talked to those Indians, as well as a number of people that I was personally came in contact with and known had actually been taken to mines and shown many things, which in turn I got lucky and they were shown to me, both on Indian land and off of Indian land. There are three main faults that run through the Uinta Mountains. There's the upper fault, which runs right along the upper crest line of the Uinta Mountains, and then it's associated with many cross faults, and that creates block faulting. Then you have the midline fault that runs through the mid part of the Uintas, which runs through the Kidney Lake Basin and all the way over to eastern Utah. There's a third fault, which is not very well known, and it takes a very trained eye by geologists to pick it up, but there's a lower fault, lower than the South Flank fault, that runs through Indian land. But you can pick it up in 4 different places across the Uintas, and this is where the gold on the Indian land comes from, is I just call it the Indian Fault. But you can pick it up in Hanna, between Hanna and Rock Creek. There's a very well faulted area that can be seen if you know what you're looking for. Anyway, I've chosen to speak on a area that's not in the Uinta Mountains, that's closer to the Wasatch Front, and it's between East Canyon Reservoir and the Wasatch Front. A few years ago, there was a gentleman that had bought I guess it's a recreational permit with one of the recreational people that you have to buy a permit for. I think it's $300 or $400 a year, and then they allow you to get onto the property and park a trailer, camp, do whatever you'd like to do there, fish if you want to travel to the streams. Anyway, there was a gentleman from Bountiful that had rented a parking place up a canyon called Sheep Canyon. And I'm not giving you any names of these peoples because they haven't given me permission to do so. And so I wouldn't break their confidence in what I've been told and what I've learned, and then my 5 years practically up there on that property documenting this. All of this stuff that I'm going to show you is on private property. They're locked gates. Unless you go on the East Canyon side, you can buy a permit from the East Canyon people where I think, if you'd like to hike around, you might want to go give them $1,000 to do so. But you get the picture there. Anyway, this fellow had a campsite up Sheep Canyon, and there's a hill that goes up on the west side of where he was parked. And I would say it's about a 60-degree angle. It's very, very steep. And there's a trail, a very definite trail that winds up that you can see quite easily from his campsite. Well, this gentleman is about 300 pounds, and he's not in very good shape. So he's starting up this trail, and he gets up, maybe 20%, 25% of the way going up this trail, and all of a sudden he starts slipping, and a rock comes out from underneath his foot, and down he goes. As he was falling, of course, the natural instinct of a man is to put his hand behind him and stop him, and that's exactly what he done. And when he hit the ground, he laid there a minute, and then he looks over at his hand, and there's a piece of metal sticking up between his fingers. And he thought, what the devil is that? So he reached down and he pulls it, and it's partly embedded in the rocks in the ground, and he pulls this piece of metal out, and it's a cross. And it's written in Spanish, but the amazing thing about this cross is that it was a map that was on a cross. And the cross is quite big. It's well over 12 inches tall. And in fact, in my demonstration, I've got 2 slides because I couldn't fit it on my scanner. You can't scan the cross and get the lower portion. I could have stitched it together, but I'm not electronically inclined like my comrades are. If I have trouble, I just send it to him. Anyway, this cross was made out of lead and silver. And he got quite excited when he found this cross, and so he went back down to camp, and then I don't know how many people was in his camp, but the following weekend he got his nephews and some other people involved, and they needed metal detectors. Well, I have a good friend that lives in Farmington, and I can tell you his name is Peterson, very well-to-do man. They went to Peterson and asked him if he had a metal detector, and they told him the story, and he says, well, I'll just go buy some. So he went and bought a half a dozen metal detectors, and they all went up on this hillside. Well, what they found was astounding up on that hillside. They ended up finding about 18 silver bars, 1 gold bar. They found a lead pouch that had little nuggets all over in it. They found balls that you would use in your old flintlock Spanish guns. They found a knife that had Spanish inscriptions on it on one side, just barely visible. They found 2 rings that was in the same place where there was some other things, which evidently when the body rotted, the rings just lay there. There was a number of other things that was found there that were just pieces of gold, pieces of silver, all different kinds of things that they had found. Well, what they'd done is they went up, and when they found an item, they would stick a wire with a flag attached on the site, and then they would take and draw that. Now, I believe they probably had cameras. I was never told by the nephews or by Peterson whether or not they had taken actual photographs of these things on the site. But they recovered a great number of things. When I first visited the site, it was very evident to me that it was a massacre site because of the way that the gold bars and everything was strewn. There was a trail that went up through a little flat area, and the personal items of the Spaniard was in one place, and then this trail went through, and then things were on both sides as if somebody had got into a backpack, grabbed them, and just threw them like an Indian would do. So it was very evident that it was a massacre site, and whoever was involved in that, or how many of them, that's exactly where they stayed and lay. And it wasn't until just a few years ago that this was found. Now, if you turn the lights off, we'll go on with the presentation. This is the cross which was found by the fellow that had the camp. And if you'll notice in the right-hand arm, there is a gold nugget that's embedded in that cross. There's a bracket that you can't see very well. You'll see it in another picture that I have, but it's enclosed in a bracket. You'll see everything is written in Spanish. You'll see a trail or a place where you have either a trail or a drainage going up with quite a few indications on the right-hand side, and then you'll see 2 X's on the other side. Now, I'll explain those two as we go through. There, the arrow is showing the gold nugget that's embedded in the right arm of the cross. And you'll notice that it does not have a left arm. But it's my opinion that there was a left arm. One of the things that is pretty striking is you'll notice this line would have continued and possibly connected to this right here. All right, here is the translation of this. Right up here is AHRF tesor. Now, most of the Spaniards that came into the western United States were not real edge people, so they didn't spell everything exactly the same. For instance, the word tesor in dictionaries would be tesoro, which means treasure. In this case, it's just tesor. That translates to a wonderful, rich treasure. Redotero is a word taken from the dictionary in Spanish called de redotero, which means charted course by water. Redotero in this case means charted course by land. Now, this can be confusing if you look at it. Tesor de jundo por miedo de. What does that mean? Treasure abandoned for fear. For fear of what? On the bottom you have simply redotero, charted course, en España, with 2 X's. Well, if anybody knows the Spanish language, they know that the Spanish talk backwards from the way they write. They don't write, there is a white horse. They write, there is a horse white. And the same thing is here. Charted course, en España, would translate to 2 Spanish minds. It's just how they do things. Leguas oeste is 1 league west or 3 miles west. So they're giving you a starting point here, and they're going 3 miles west. Now, if you'll notice this area here and that there, that the X's or the marks, if you'll see that they're turned slightly, they're not the same. They have just a little different meaning, and I'll show you what that is. This is just another one I turned sideways so you could see the patina that's on the cross. And you'll see it's been rubbed off in this area and in several other areas where it got heavy rubbing, and this end, on the end where it says Utas, is turned up just a little bit. Now, the approximate size of that cross is 12 3/8 inches. So it's a very, very large cross. Now, I have taken that cross and I have placed it on a topog map. And as you can see, it fits absolutely perfect. Now, I have cut this part of the map off and made a cross out of it so that you could, in your minds, place that map on there and see how it perfectly fits. And you'll see that this, again, is missing here, just like I pointed out on the lead map. Now, here's an interesting area here that for a long time I couldn't figure out what that was. But believe me, I've covered every inch of this ground from East Canyon to the east face of the Wasatch Range, putting this together, and it took me quite a few years to do that. Now, I've placed 4 dots here on this map, and the reason I did that is because I couldn't tell when you go back to this one whether that is a 4th mark on there or whether that's just a flaw, and I couldn't tell at the time, so I just left it on there. Right here is where the actual cross and all of the artifacts were found and dug up, and they weren't too deep in the soil, maybe 6-8 inches. So from the time frame, and you'll learn the time frame here in just a little short while. This here, I've crossed and come up on this side of the road, and there's a formation of rocks right here that pretty well shows that area there, and I believe that that's the mark that it is. What this is up here, I've never been able to determine whether it's a smelter site or what it is. The line that connects the two is what's confusing to me, but it looks like something going into another pot, which again I thought might be a smelter, but I could be wrong, because when I got to this area, there are 3 large rocks up there. One of them, maybe 20 feet high that's shaped kind of like a mushroom on the top. Again, you'll notice I've placed the X's the way they are on the map, the positioning of them. Now I've transposed this on this map, same map, onto a aerial. Right here, this little circle I've drawn is where the artifacts were found. If you'll notice the 3 dots here, here, and there, they're on the points of 3 ridges. And I'm positive that's what they meant. I don't see a 4th one unless they went to that one right there. Well, this trail winds up and goes up here. When you get to this point right here, you see the shape of that ridge? I put a black line across the way the ridges are running. If you compare that back to the Spanish map, how they're running, you'll see that they line up perfectly. And this one is the same way. That's the interpretation. They're trying to tell you something. There's a rock Spanish monument right across the side of the trail there, and there's a rock Spanish monument there. I followed this trail all the way up, and there's a trail that comes down and goes across the ridge of the mountains right here, going to the west side. This is where you get up here where the 3 rocks are that I told you about that might have something to do with the smelter or what. Excuse me. Now, if we go back to the map itself, we get back here, you'll see that there's a half moon here and there's a triangle here. I've never been able to find out what this half moon is, but I did get to this point, and it's a point of a hill that comes right to a point right there. I would suspect that there's probably some kind of a mark there, but during the time I was there, I was never able to find it. Now, I have moved this over on a aerial map that shows this going over where I showed you the trail went over. This is the ridge line dividing the drainages. In each one of these little areas that I've outlined, and you can't see them in this photo, and they continue on down to about right here, are a series of ledges that are in those covered areas, and they show up very nicely as rock ledges, all on the east side. So if you go back to the give this computer a little time to work, huh? If you go back and you see this line right across here that they've got drawn, they show a trail or a drainage right through there. I think that's that trail that I drew. However, this right here is what I'm talking about. That would be these ledges that they're showing, which to me is a very good landmark. Now, I believe there's a lost leg to this map, and I'll tell you why I've put this other stuff off to the side. This is where that continues right there, and they've just cut this portion off right there. Well, back about 8 years ago, there was a Mexican-American that was working at Hill Air Force Base. His name was Vigil, and he was deer hunting up on Bertinoli's land, and all of that private land is up there. And he claims that he ran across a wheel that was sticking out of the ground. And upon closer examination, he dug around and he found the barrel of a large cannon sticking out of the ground, and then right next to it was, he claims he covered them up and even planted a small tree right there, which indicates to me that there was no tree where he found those cannons. Now, I can't substantiate that as being a fact. However, this vigil man never knew anything about this area over here or any stories. This was just him. But I put it together, and I've added these words here. This is my own words, meaning defense from the Indians. This treasure was abandoned for the fear of death. Now, we have two different documents written by Spanish and Jesuits, which are very well documented, that use these same words for fear, treasure was abandoned for fear of death. And I believe that is the same thing on this one. Seguir esto retiro, which means just follow this charted course to the Spanish mines, which are the two X's. And there's the bracket, of course, without the nugget being involved. This is a number of the things that were found at the site and drawn. And like I say, I think there was many things. The rings and different things aren't in here, but you can see there's a lot of gold, there's a lot of silver, there's nuggets, or just various items that they found. This is the shape of some of the very crude silver bars that they found. Now, these are actual, these aren't photographs, these are photocopies which were given to me, and it shows the bars, and on the right-hand side of this bar, stamped in the side, which I don't have a picture of, but I intend on getting that, was stamped in the side of it, "Death to all those who follow." Now, here's some of the bars that were found with inscriptions as well as a map. Now, these things tell a real story if you look at them, and if you I don't suppose many people would look at them and be able to come up with the fact of the things that I've found, but these things are all telling a story. This guy that was evidently leaving this place was in where the massacre took place, was taking back the things to wherever he was going so that they would be able to come back and know what they was looking for and have the correct information to do it. These 4 zeros, if you know anything about the Spaniards and previous gold bars or silver bars that have been found either by Mel Fisher, clear back that dates into the 1500s, they all have an expedition stamp on them. And that's exactly what that is. It's an expedition stamp of the year of 1815. Now, I believe that the 1815 was the date that they left. And I think they had all of this in their backpacks, headed back either to New Mexico or to Old Mexico until such time that they figured they might be able to get back safely. This is very evident. There's 5 gold arrobas. Now, an arroba, you can hear about different weights, is probably about 23.5 pounds. So what they're saying is they have left behind 5 arrobas of gold and 20 arrobas of silver from the 1815 expedition. Now, these 4 circles again represent the expedition, and this is a treasure symbol. Here I go back, I'm going to talk about the Uintas again. I said I wasn't going to do that. Shame. Up on a tree above Kidney Lake Basin at the head of Slate Creek was a tree. A lot of people think it had the words Oro on it. They have all kinds of different explanations of the tree, as well as in 1856. I seen a drawing of that tree that was drawn by Don Foote when he was there, taken there by Touroos the Indian, and it had this mark on it. And I think that mark means treasure. Treasure of the expedition. It's almost identical to that mark that was on that tree. This 5, I think, represents a total of 5 expeditions. Maybe they were there for 5 years. You know, it's pretty hard to put these things together and to make them all really make sense, but you have to do what you've got with nobody else being able to give you any other information. Tapar, of course, means covered. So what they're saying is they covered the treasure of the expedition of 1815 at the place where the cross is. Well, when this stuff was being found, there was a lead map, and this is all it had on it. Expedition with a cross, and it showed the mountain. And this is my drawing from the one I have. It might be a little bit off from the one that they pulled out of the ground. Basically, it's what you see is what you get. It's pretty accurate. Now, this is what I found when I finally got to the site where I knew that the mines were. Now, I've developed some instruments called the instrument I developed and invented is called the Loctron. There's a road down here that goes right along the base along the creek, which is a long way down from the mountain. But when I got down to the area, got my machine out, I got 2 immediate lines. They went right up, boom, boom, right to here. And so I followed those lines out, and you couldn't get in there with beaver dams had been in there and water, and you couldn't get in there with a vehicle. But when I followed them lines out, it took me right to a mine, right there, and it took me to... Now this other mix over here is a mine that I found around the mountain from these 2. I later found out in doing the research on this that in the early 1900s, after Morgan and that area had been settled, and this became private land in there, that these mines had actually been worked by people from the Weber County area, Morgan and through there. But what they was doing, this is a giant iron gossan. If anybody, I understand there's a couple of geologists in here, but there's a giant iron gossan that runs through here, and associated with that iron gossan were heavy amounts of gold and silver that was associated with them. All 3 of those mines are cleaned out, and who done it was the early 1900 inhabitants of the area that had went back and found those mines. Doing further research in trying to find out what they got out of them mines, I found out that they was selling this ore to Ideal Cement Company. And they was crushing it, making it into a fine powder, and mixing it in with their cement and making a stronger cement. If any of you know what the term pozzolan is a volcanic ash. It comes from Italy, and they use pozzolan to make strong concrete. All of the Roman aqueducts that were built and are still standing today are a result of the fact that they used pozzolan in that concrete to make them, and it made it so much stronger. And this is what they mined that out for. They wasn't mining it for gold and silver, which was in the iron gossan. Down below the base, there's an iron vein that runs right through here and up over the mountain and into the other side. Huge pieces of iron. I seen one half as big as this, whatever that is over there. It's a piano or organ, but at least half the size of that, and maybe a foot and a half thick. Numerous pieces ranging from 5 to 12 inches in size, pure iron. Big, huge iron vein runs through there. So it's associated with the iron and a fault system that runs all the way off of the Wasatch Fault that is, and it shows on a geological map that runs right smack through this portion of the property. Now, I told you about a bracket, and we could go back and I could show you the picture, but I told you about a bracket. That bracket is right there, and what it is a large shelf that runs right through the lower part. You have to drop down in it. It's quite smooth from here down. You can walk down, but it's quite steep on the other side. Right here is a tree with a Spanish mark on it. But right in the center of the bracket is a hole, about 5 feet deep. Now, it's my opinion that at least a portion of that treasure, maybe all of that treasure they was referring to, was in that hole. And I believe it was marked with a big flat rock, probably with a cross on it. Anyway, this is a modern day story dealing with the Spaniards. They were in this area. This is one of about 20 sites that I have that I've researched that there is no information on in any of the books that I've worked on. I spent 2 or 3 years at this site trying to find out what it was all about. I finally did come up with everything that was necessary to decipher it. The only other... let's go forward. What are you doing to me, Sean? It's evident if you look at the map, you look at the shape of these, and you put it on a topog map. You also put this on a aerial map. There is no question that this is the area. Many times I thought this is where the treasure site is, and I covered that heavy. There's a lot of oak brush there, and it's hard to get through, but I finally realized from this here 1 league west that they meant from these 2 peaks, it's 1 league west to the Spanish mines. Well, they're there, so there's no question that the map is accurate. The bracket with the gold nugget in, I still figure heavily that it's the bracket that I found on the right there with the hole. Possibly one of those early people that inhabited the area found that, crossed, turned the rock over, and dug the gold up. Still a mystery. Maybe I'm wrong. I have some other theories which I haven't put on here because I'm still hunting. However, there was a story that came out of Morgan where a scoutmaster took his scout troop back into this area, and the scout boys just took off hiking. They don't know exactly where they were, but 2 or 3 scouts found a rock with a mark on it, and they turned that rock over, and underneath that rock were gold and silver bars, but they said they were too heavy to lift, so they must have been, pretty 60-pound bars or heavy, and so they just put the rock back over and covered them back up and went back and told their scoutmaster. From doing research and talking to people, I found out that the scoutmaster went back up with the boys and was hunting for that area. At first, the first story I heard, they never could find the rock. Whether that has ever changed and whether they did find it is another story. If that story is true, then of course there is another treasure that has been buried besides the one which would have been in the bracket that was marked on the map. And that's all I have. Do we have any questions? Yes.
Is the actual rock still present, or is that itself?
Which rock are you talking about?
The round cover stone?
Well, you mean the ones the scouts found?
Right.
Yeah, they slid it back over in place according to what they said. Whether they went back and found it, I don't know.